We're joined now by what's going to be probably the future commissioner, Josh Pate. Good morning, good sir. Good to have you. Thank you for joining Ruffino and Joe show. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm a little on Monday. Monday's the breathe in, breathe out sort of day if you've traveled all weekend, and then you go do the Sunday show where you hope you have your best energy on Sunday night after you've traveled. Brother, if you travel from Nashville to Oklahoma City, you did it this past weekend. You were on an orange airplane, and it was very, very rambunctious. I don't know what the vibe would have been if they had lost, but that was never a game in doubt. So I know.
What was the over under in what did the model put for in reference to how many times Rocky Top was sung on the plane?
It just said N/A, just said not available.
Oh, okay.
It just didn't compute. I don't know that the model understands infinity as a concept.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very fair. I got to start off one thing with you, okay? Because me and Joe have had massive debates about this, and you said it last night on your show, and I just want to bring it back up. There is no line that I've ever heard in college football content ever said better than what you said last night. And I'm quoting, the AP poll sponsored by drug use is going to be reused on Ruffino and Joe show. So can you expound on that, even though it was perfectly used?
Well, I used a couple of examples. I think it's the first AP reaction segment I've ever done because I don't look at the AP. So last Friday, I looked at the total AP for the first time this year because someone had asked me a question. I just wanted to see where I had one team in conjunction with where the AP had them. And I realized randomly Central Florida was not in the AP. I have them like 18th or something like that. And so I said, I just assumed they were ranked. So then I started looking at the others receiving votes and tabulated it and realized the AP had UCF all the way down at 36, which is impossible. So, well, it's possible if you don't watch football, but it's impossible if you've been paying attention. So then I started saying, last night when we were sitting in pre-production, I said, show me the AP because it had just been released. And I looked and I was comparing it with my numbers and we weren't close on a lot of teams. So I said, take 5 minutes at the end of the show. I just want to talk about this. And the more I thought about it and the more I cross-referenced, the more I just got to the point where I realized people aren't watching football, which is not a shock. It's not a shock. It's one thing if you watch the game and you don't know what you're looking at, and we do have some of that. But these people aren't watching the game. Perfect example is Brigham Young. Brigham Young looks to have blown Kansas State out. Well, I watched the game because I picked BYU to win the game outright. I know good and well how that game happened. And yet it's very obvious folks just saw 38-9 or whatever it was, and they're undefeated. We got to put them in the top 22. Oklahoma State, I didn't have in the top 25 coming into last week, and felt validated by that performance with a backup quarterback coming in there and beating them in Stillwater. They can't run the ball, despite having the returning Doak Walker winner and the most experienced offensive line in the history of organized sports. And so they are not what anyone thought they were. It's just that they were still undefeated, so you can't knock them until they've lost a game. I've never believed you are what your record says you are in college football. So I've never needed to see you lose to drop you. I've never necessarily needed to see you win to jump you. So we just went through that last night, and it became painfully obvious that whether it's legal or illegal, drug use is involved in a lot of the.
Well, I'll say this. You always say what you just brought up. Your record is what you say you are. I still think USC showed me more in a loss than I see from a physical standpoint in such a long time. And they took it to LSU too, which I'm like, look, man, that team's physical. They're ready to play.
That was, if you take that USC Michigan game last year, that's a 45-16 final.
No doubt.
That is the second half of Michigan Penn State last year. That's what that game would have looked like had they played USC. They wouldn't have thrown the ball. Now, they didn't throw the ball 2 days ago either. The difference is, like Michigan didn't throw the ball a couple of days ago either, but it didn't work because they lost they ended up barely winning the game. They trailed with a couple of minutes to go. I don't know what stood out the most to you guys about that thing. So I'm at the Oklahoma game and I'm trying to watch I'm on the field pregame warmups. Incredible internet at that place, by the way. So I'm able to just watch the USC game. I had to go back and look at Miller Moss's stat line. So he's 20. I've got a piece of paper here.
28 of 51.
51,
yeah.
He got pressured on 24 of his 55 dropbacks.
Insane.
And still ended up having them in the game, still ended up threading one on 3rd and 16 to give them the lead with 7 minutes to go. So I'm like, it's incredible that they've just taken a sledgehammer to the face all day and they have the lead. Not that they haven't been physically owned, because they got physically owned, but they have the lead. That team never does that last year. They had like 4 or 5 guys get a hand on a ball carrier on the run that broke it open late that gave Michigan a chance to win. I'm not saying they're fortified now. I'm just saying that there have been leaps and bounds improvement. So then I watch the game I'm at. I look at my phone when I get back to the hotel at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had a bunch of people saying, I guess we see USC got exposed. They're not a Big Ten championship threat. And I said, I need to rewatch the game, which I did. I came away feeling good that I picked Michigan to win it. So nothing happened that I was shocked by. I came away thinking, is USC not a bigger Big Ten title contender than Michigan is after this game? Because they don't play Ohio State and Oregon, and Michigan does. And Penn State's the next biggest threat that they have coming out there, and they play them in the Coliseum. I wouldn't feel good because I lost the game, but I would feel vindicated if I were Lincoln Riley behind closed doors that the moves I made are paying immediate dividends. And man, you go sell that in recruiting, and you can supplement a little bit through the portal. But it's an early stage result. But it's the kind of thing that makes me wonder: could we see them do at USC what Josh has been able to do over in Knoxville? Could we be in the early stages of that?
Depth.
I think one of the depth, and we saw depth that Michigan had on defense. I feel like one of the weirdest things to figure out from this weekend is what the heck Michigan is. It almost feels like that's not sustainable to run the ball as much as they did. I'm just curious, like your thought on where do they go from here? Can you just run the ball down everyone's throat every game?
I think you say it's hard to figure out what they are only because if they are what you saw, that makes no sense. Like, that's not
exactly
normal. I think it's easy to figure out what they are. I just think what they are is going to be the most extreme run to pass ratio since triple option football was introduced to the sport. I thought in a way, the reason I thought they'd win the game is actually because they went to Orji, the backup, who is not a good thrower. He's not a quarterback. And so a lot of people looked at that and said, ooh, they're not going to be able to throw the ball. And I said, that's the point. They got no business throwing the ball. 7 of 12 for 32 yards is his final passing number. That they could afford to be that extreme, and that was their only shot to win this game. Now, as you saw, even with things going their way, Michigan clearly got the game they wanted. They clearly dictated terms in the game. Even getting the game they wanted, you play that style, and the best case scenario is you're playing on the razor's edge. Everything's got to be you got to thread the needle with that kind of approach. So the answer is that you saw Michigan. That is Michigan. That will be them the rest of the year. But that's also why I say what I say about USC having probably a much higher ceiling. Michigan pressed their face against the ceiling of their potential Saturday. That is absolutely peak Michigan potential, which is going to be good enough just in terms of pure suffocation to beat 9 out of the 12 teams they play. And you know what? If you come off a title year, lose your entire staff and roster, at least impact players on offense, and you win me 9 games, and one of my losses is to Texas at home, and I've got a new head coach, I'm okay with that. I'd be perfectly fine with that.
100% agree with you. I felt like Les Miles was sitting somewhere doing the Birdman emoji when he's watching a team run the ball 52 straight times or whatever it was. But I agree. You know, Josh, here's the crazy thing. They scored 20 points on offense. So I go back to USC and say, look, you don't have that pick six. You don't play elite defense, and you don't have playmakers out, on the outside. That could be another game. Joe and I talked about this last night. 15 of 18 for Miller Moss with 3 touchdowns in the second half.
Yeah.
Spare me. There is one team that I know that you've seen in person that I really want your thoughts on, and that's Texas. Josh, I don't know what I don't want to say I don't know what to make of them. I know that you said they're bigger. They look better than a lot of other teams. They look the part. My question is, I'm worried about them in reference to running the football in some instances, but I don't know necessarily what to make of them. Through 4 weeks, what have you made of Texas so far?
So the first thing is when I went and watched them against Michigan, the talk going into game week was sort of confusing because the talk was if Michigan can turn this into a fight, essentially if Michigan can turn it into the game they just played last Saturday, that's advantage Michigan. It was never advantage Michigan to fight Texas. Texas, maybe people just need to see it with their own eyes to understand it. Texas is the bigger, physical, deeper, better team than Michigan is. Now, we saw all that, so that's not a mystery to anyone anymore. Remember in fall camp, when they had the 2 tailbacks go down, there was immediate panic, And everyone said, and I said specifically on short yardage, big pressure moments, 3rd and 4th down, you'll have about half a dozen of them per season in big games. What are they going to do? Their best option, as far as I could see it, is Quinn Ewers falling forward. That was their best option in those moments. Well, that hasn't necessarily changed a whole lot. It's just that they've won some games. Therefore, people have forgotten that may be a vulnerability. Tennessee lost like 180 combined starts in their secondary. But because they've won some games, all of a sudden, and they lost a nickel in fall camp, but all of a sudden, since they've won some games, people forget. The thing about, here's a memeism for you. The thing about a crack in a dam is it's always there. It doesn't matter if water pressure is not applied to it. There's still a crack there. Sometimes we just have to wait a little bit deeper into the season because this is not pro football. You don't play an NFL team every Sunday. You got to wait a little deeper into the season. So Georgia will go to Texas, in a couple of weeks. And we will see. We will see them needing to run the ball instead of running it just out of feeling like it. And we'll see if it's there or not. And if it's not, then that throws a crowbar in your bicycle spokes. And all of a sudden, Texas looks vulnerable. With Tennessee, we will see them play better quarterbacks than Jackson Arnold. I promise you guys. We'll see better quarterback play than Jackson Arnold. So we will see if someone can expose the Tennessee secondary. So let's just say, for worst case purposes for a Texas viewer, let's say you're right. And let's say there is a little vulnerability at tailback. That just makes them a really, really good team with a flaw, which I have seen with every one of these teams so far. So the only difference is, I think, as the hot air balloon starts to drift off into the stratosphere, you just got to sandbag it a little bit, because I don't think I've seen a pull away team yet. And that includes Texas. But Texas, man, I will tell you this. It's so obvious when you look at them. Everyone rightfully praised Sark for making some moves in the portal to backfill their pass catchers. Their offensive line is built entirely through high school football recruiting. 5 out of 5 of those starters, their last stop before Austin, Texas, was something high school. And so they've built the core of that football team the right way.
Kissing the prom queen before you go to college. I talked to somebody, a college coach, a defensive coordinator today, and we brought it up. And he's like, do you run Quinn Ewers on 3rd and 1 with an oblique strain? And those are the things that but I do feel that where I criticize them, where they're still a lot really good, is their interior defensive line, which I was like, okay. So yeah. Joe, what do you think? We're going into this game, and Josh, I know you're going to be here, but
yeah,
Georgia, Alabama, massive. Kalen DeBoer, year 1. I know you're going to be there. It's going to be electric. Josh, it looks like the hurricane is moving a little bit more towards Florida, so this game might be a little bit more clear. This is probably one of the biggest matchups that we're going to get in the season. How do you see that game as of Monday going into the week?
I'm happy about the weather report, first off. I think same thing about Alabama and Georgia apply that we just said about Texas. There's flaws and vulnerabilities. Some are known, some may not be known until Saturday night. I enjoy, as early in the season as we can possibly do it, having very big-time matchups with top 5 teams, because we get to find out about them. So it's a real profile setter for these teams. There's no guesswork after you play Georgia, or guesswork. I mean, is anyone guessing about NC State now? No, because they play 2 other teams.
Right.
So,
God, we were so high on them too, Josh. I'm sorry. We were so high on them.
We were reasonably high on them. We weren't higher than the consensus, Blake. No.
ACC contender. And them and Virginia.
We said sleeper.
Now, Josh. Oh, no. And it's even better because it was red. Whatever you just did, it was red. That's makes it even better.
How toxic is this show that a question about Georgia Bama goes off the rails with NC State within 35 seconds? This is a disaster. So anyway, speaking of Dave Doran at NC State, I want to see somebody just flat out challenge Bama running the ball. Yeah, Wisconsin couldn't do it. Number 1, because they don't have the horses. Number 2, because they were behind early. No one's had it, and Georgia's got it. Georgia's got the best athletic profile that Bama will see all year until the playoff, and maybe including the playoff if they make it. So I am I'm curious on that front, because I think Bama does not have first-round talent on their defensive front. They got really good college players, and they're probably a little deeper there with guys that they can trust to rotate in than Georgia has been. Georgia had 3 guys play 50-plus snaps against Kentucky, and the next closest played 17 on the D-line, and that's because they were banged up. So the hope around Georgia is get some guys back, including Michael Williams, and then we can go to Alabama and we'll be able to. I mean, if Kentucky would have sustained a couple drives, Georgia probably loses that game.
Right.
So hat tip to Georgia for not letting it happen. So that's the first thing I'm interested in watching. Second thing is Carson Beck's got to win this game. This is a Carson Beck game. You've got a very green, untested secondary, very talented but untested with Alabama. This is to me the matchup of that game with Georgia's offense. Is you thought to yourself, we've got the best overall collection of pass catchers that we've had here. This is what they thought in the spring. We have got Carson Beck returning. It's the biggest move that could happen for our team. And that includes any recruit, any portal ad. Carson Beck saying, I'm coming back. That's all they could talk about in the spring. Okay, this is where those moves have to win you a football game. Because I do not believe necessarily that they're going to bowling ball their way to a win here. And that's even if they're effective running the ball. I don't believe that's going to be the case. Their tight end position, absent Brock Bowers, has some very good names there. Delp is a very good name. Lawson Lucky's
no question.
The guy from Stanford's a good name. They are not the blocker that Brock Bowers was, but that just means that you got development, you got work to do with your team. So they've had a bye. Both of them have had byes. The stuff that happens in this game that makes it almost feel like a one-game season is it doesn't matter. Think back to last year. Last year, I'm in Detroit International Airport watching that Iron Bowl. It's 4th and 31. Hugh Freeze and Auburn has Bama on the ropes. And anyone who understands this league understood win or loss. It helps them that they win. But win or loss, that game that was going to happen against Georgia next week was going to be its own season. These teams build to play each other. That's how they recruit. That's how they develop. That's how they staff. It's so incestuous because half of them have worked at the other place. They are built to play each other. It is so beautiful that it happens in September this year. And it's not a COVID year. Last time they played a regular season, it was the COVID year. I think the time before that, the last time Georgia would have been in Tuscaloosa before that COVID year, so full stadium, was 2007. Matt Stafford to Mikey Anderson in overtime. So it doesn't happen nearly as often as it should, but I'm looking forward to it. I'd be very interested to get both of your takes on like what you have circled in this game.
Yeah, I think for me, you hit the nail on the head with Alabama's secondary. So, Josh, it's not missed on me. So when we talk about college coaches, I talk to a lot of them. You talk to a lot of them. And when they go out to the podium, like what Kalen DeBoer did in SEC Media Days, interviews, etc., he brought up his secondary so much of that, the lack of experience.
Yep.
Well, here's what I know. I know that when a coach continues to go out there and say that, you don't have confidence in it. That's what I know. But the question becomes for me is I don't know if Georgia has an identity offensively in this sense. Dominic Lovett had 6 catches for 94 yards, and you went away from him for 20 straight minutes. And my whole problem with that is I know that you're trying to get everybody involved, but this dude right here, and people on the audio, I'm sorry, it's a picture of Joe Burrow, our Lord and Savior, by you, Jesus Christ. Okay, that guy would go to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and it didn't matter. I think sometimes you got to get guys involved. I'm interested to see about Bama's secondary, is my opinion. Joe, what about you?
I think the big thing for me, and you just talked about it, Josh, is the health situation for Georgia. They have this week off. We don't know Michael Williams, his availability. Fully healthy Georgia is better than Alabama. Banged up Georgia makes this game a bit of a toss-up, in my opinion, especially because it's at Alabama and they get the advantage of home field advantage. I want to ask you this, though, Josh, because like we mentioned this last week when we talked about our rankings on the Wednesday show. If Alabama does win this game, are we comfortable putting them at number 1? Does it feel a little bit too reactive? I feel like that's fair to throw them as the best team right now because that has to be the best win, beating Georgia at home.
I'd have to see the game, obviously. I would imagine my numbers would not vault them to number 1. I would imagine an AP voter may be very tempted to bump them to number 1. I think then the next thing you would look at is Georgia's going to go play Texas the same day Bama plays Tennessee. So however you have that sorted out, it will sort itself out on the field. I can tell you there would be an act of Congress emanating from Tuscaloosa to not let that happen. But I could see it. I I will say this in terms of just team profiling. If you asked me about this matchup at media days, I would have said what you just said. I would have said, hey, a healthy Georgia now, they're noticeably better than what I think Alabama's going to be this year. I would still percentage points wise say you're right about that, but it's not an overwhelming statement in my mind right now. I know what the personnel, I know the rosters. And Bama doesn't really take a backseat all that much there, but you can give me the edge roster. Just the team, like the way the Georgia football team has played so far relative to what I think the standard should be and what the expectation should be, that it hasn't hit it for me yet. Now, it could be that this game's the game it hits it, and we look back and say, I can't believe this was a doubt in my mind. But we're talking about the future. That's why we got to see it play out.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.
I was thinking this the whole time you said this too. What happens when Georgia eliminates explosive plays with that secondary? Because, I have been on the Jalen Milroe hype train. Joe and I had a long conversation about this. I thought in the SEC championship game, Milroe in the intermediate pass game to Bond was a big deal. Josh, I thought that's why they won.
Yeah.
What happens if that gets taken away? And then what happens if they can go man-to-man coverage? I mean, look, I think Ryan Williams is special. You ain't seen no DBs like this, big dog. So, I mean, there just comes a point where I'm like, look, this is the – I ain't gonna lie. I'm really excited for this game because I think it's just so many chess pieces too. Before we talked or went started recording this, you and I and Joe were talking about Tennessee, and you were there watching Oklahoma. Does Tennessee have the largest stock rise up right now than any team in the country? Because I feel like, in what we talked about, the alignment that they have, plus what they're doing on the field, Josh, they feel like that they're on more of a rise than people maybe truly understand after what happened in Oklahoma this week.
I would agree with that statement. I think the biggest indicator that it's a program on the rise instead of just a team is when a program / team starts to radically elevate in an area that's outside the head coach's wheelhouse. That's always a big blinking red light to me. And Josh Heupel, I would never doubt. I would think that I was taking crazy pills if they couldn't score. They'll always be able to score. They'll always be able to attract quarterback talent. All that's a given. But it's also a given that you could score a lot and you could be really, really vulnerable in big moments like Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma because you can't get off the field. You can't stop anything defensively. That was kind of Tennessee for a little while under Heupel. It is not Tennessee anymore. I went over there in the spring. I was with him all day. I was with a lot of their staff. All they wanted to talk about was defense, and all they wanted to talk about was they thought they were overlooked in terms of their quality depth, and they thought that their defensive staff was overlooked. So I just filed that away because a lot of folks say that, but they're BSing you. I didn't feel like they were. And so then we get to the season. It's early. We get to the season, and the biggest scale up on any side of the ball has been Tennessee's defense. That's what people are leading the conversation with, and that's with Nico at quarterback. So I think a lot of folks were just flat out scared to say Tennessee and contender in the same sentence because you haven't said it in a long time, but you hadn't said it in a long time because they haven't checked the boxes. It's not that difficult to figure out what wins in this sport. Tennessee just hadn't had it in plentiful enough supply, and it's because they didn't hire right for a long time. They hired right here. And Heupel was not thought of as a slam dunk. In fact, I remember when Heupel got hired at Tennessee, he came up there from UCF. There were people in Orlando who said, oh, well, one more down year, he would have been on the hot seat here. So it was far from a slam dunk. But what you got is you got him, you got his AD and Danny White that came up there. And they came up there. We cannot overlook this when we're talking about alignment. They came up there, and that athletic department was a cesspool. It was disgusting. Yep. And fast forward 4 years, if you would have said at that moment, what will Tennessee athletics / football be in 4 years? You could have painted yourself a nightmare scenario. And instead, it's gone the complete opposite direction, which should give everyone out there hope who's not in a good place right now. Because if Tennessee circa 2019, 2021 can do it, Any athletic department can get out of its own way and do it. So I was talking to you guys earlier. I was doing a thing where one of the major publications out there is trying to get some quips from people. And their question is Tennessee a national title contender? So they said, people are hesitant to say yes. I said, why? And they were saying, well, I guess it's just because they haven't done it, which is okay. But I'm not a big believer that you have to have done something to be capable of doing something. Like there's a first time for stuff to happen. So if you got high level quarterback play, dynamic quarterback play, you can create explosives on the ground and through the air. You've got really good synergy and culture. Those dudes will go over a cliff for Josh Heupel. Love that guy. And you can play defense, if not situationally, just outright high level defense, and they can do both. You're a national title contender. I don't know why there's a question of that. The only question is, that orange tea has not been in the conversation in a while, and some people are just uncomfortable because they think it's snake bit. It's snake bit until you hire the right guy, and you hired the right guy. That's how this sport works.
Well, one more thing, Joe, before you get to your question here, Josh. Here's what I'd say too, because I cover college baseball at a very extreme rate. Alignment's not just in one sport when you're talking about an athletic department, right? And so, like, look, man, we've had a lot of access to LSU baseball as an example. I know who they're recruiting against. And I know what Tony Vitello and that beautiful Italian is going to come in there and they're going to start throwing punches in NIL and recruiting. So alignment is a lot of different things, not just in one sport. Joe, what you got here on another question for Josh?
So Tennessee's obviously the riser that we're painting them to be, and talking about being overlooked. Is there anybody else after 4 weeks? I know it's so soon, but it feels like there's a good chunk of teams that maybe aren't getting the love that they deserve. If you had to pick one of those teams, like which team do you think deserves some more recognition that we'll be talking about at the end of the year?
And why is it the University of Miami?
Well, it's Miami. Look, so Miami's a good case study. So I'm going to get to them in a second. I got two of them in the Big 12. I think Central Florida is very overlooked. I think Iowa State is very overlooked. And I'm heavily biased towards the second, but I believe both are very overlooked. I don't know, frankly, what folks are watching with Central Florida right now. I think Central Florida is one of the 20 best teams in the country. AP doesn't have them top 35 or whatever. So make of that what you will. Put your stock in whichever poll you want to. With Iowa State, you guys will love this. I went up there in the spring, met with their staff for a day. The quarterback there, Rocco Beck, had a pretty good year last year, came on strong. He's had a solid year so far. They've got a really good wide receiver. They got a really good tailback. All of them had big INL offers. Quarterback there, especially. Quarterback had NIL offers from, shall we say, some places that people think didn't pursue a quarterback in the portal. I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down. And chose to stay in Ames, Iowa. And that's a theme throughout. They didn't really lose guys through the portal. And it's not because they matched dollar for dollar. It's because they've sold Iowa State to guys in the recruiting process. So there's an immense appreciation up there for those guys that were overlooked the first time around in high school, that this place believed in me. This place has been the one to pour into me and develop me. Basically, sort of the romantic way that you think college athletics should work is actually how it works at Iowa State. So they're a good team. And as I've watched Oklahoma State be a pretender, I've looked at Utah, and I don't know what the status of the quarterback is going to be any given week. Kansas State just got pantsed against Brigham Young in a conference game, and I'm thinking about Iowa State and having all that, and they're off everyone's radar but mine. That's okay. But with Miami, the fun thing about Miami is you either believe in them or you think it's more of the same. And if you think it's more of the same, the fun thing is there's nothing about their schedule that will allow you to be convinced otherwise. They do not play. They've got Louisville at Louisville, which I think is a really good game, but it will not grab the attention of the country. They don't play Clemson in the regular season. They play Florida State, but no one cares.
Right.
So they're not going to have the test. They're not going to have the game that makes you go, oh, wow, an eye opener, jaw dropper. The game against Florida is nothing to anyone anymore. So I'm a believer in Miami, but I was coming into the season. I picked them to win the conference. So my default will not change. But if your default was to doubt, your default also will not change. And that team is going to, my guess would be they win the ACC. They're my favorite to do it, but they're going to be in the playoff, even if probably they don't, because I don't see multiple losses on the schedule. So I went down there and watched them practice in fall camp. I've seen them in person once this year. It is an SEC team that just happens to be playing in the ACC. It's a high-level SEC team, line of scrimmage, pass rushers, quarterback's incredible, They've got really good sneaky tailback depth. They pride themselves the most on the depth and quality along the offensive line. That's Mario's specialty anyway. And so I think it's an SEC team that could compete in this conference that just happens to be playing in the ACC, and no one believes that statement because like Miami sucks, blah blah blah, whatever, and none of that's actual. That's not football. That's just hearsay. So I don't really buy into that. They're a contender though, man. Them and Tennessee both. Welcome back to the party.
Last thing for me, and I appreciate your time. I think we're about to get a really good answer in the next 3 weeks about one specific team, and that's Ole Miss. Josh, I think that they play the most physical next 3 games than anybody. Now, they might not play the high-profile names. Kentucky, South Carolina, at LSU. Both 2 of those games are away. Now, look, you were at, and there's a reason I'm staying away from LSU. I don't want to hear the truth about a team that I like.
I got something to say about that game, so let's finish with that.
Okay, but I look at them and say Ole Miss is about to play 3 very physical football teams, and I'm very intrigued to see what happens with them in the next 3 weeks. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point because like we were talking about with these other teams, everyone's got flaws. We just don't know about it until you play someone who is quality. I'm interested to see their defense. I just want to see someone stress their defense. I want to see Ole Miss take over a game defensively because I'm not going to sit here and doubt them on offense, but the profile we're looking for here is not that of a solid 9-win team. They are supposed to have leveled up from that. And so they got to do better than they have in the past, which means all these portal guys they went and got, or all these pieces they went and got that we think are connected. The engine's got to hit it, and we got to see all the train cars pull at the same time. We got to make sure there's not a broken coupler somewhere along the way. Now, Kentucky can do that to you. South Carolina can do that to you. LSU can do that to you. I don't even know which one to circle. In the aggregate, though, if they are who we think they are, then they'll weave their way through that. But that LSU game, there are 2 games where the profile is so distorted on it. The LSU-Ole Miss game is one, and the Clemson-Louisville game in the ACC is one. I believe both of these numbers are right, too. So the home team, the home Tiger there, will be rested, and they will be playing a road team coming in there off of 7 consecutive weeks of play. So the disproportionate rest advantage lies with the home team, and that's the one I circle for Ole Miss. I know that's not off of people's radars. It's on that big day, that October 12th day. Right. But I think the week of that game, everyone's all of a sudden going to realize, wait, LSU's coming off a bye. Ole Miss plays 7 weeks in a row. Wow, we need to take that into account. Well, realize that now. Know that that's on the horizon now. And it's the same thing for Louisville. If you think Clemson's getting back into the race, but they got to go through Louisville. No, Louisville's got to go through them. And them will be rested and you will not, and you'll be in their backyard. So that's why I think it's Clemson, Miami in that conference. I think LSU's got a really, really good shot. Total desperation mode. Last time anyone will have seen LSU, it probably will have been the South Carolina game. Like the country hasn't watched them since then. And so, by the way, I know that's a 2-week-old game, 3-week-old game, whatever. How disheveled Brian Kelly looked in his post game was amazing for a guy who had just won a football game. I mean, he's a guy who looks like, to go back to the old, like the dam analogy. He's a guy who had a 12-hole leak in a dam and spent all afternoon plugging it with 10 fingers, and somehow it worked. And he's just, we can't keep doing this, but I'm glad it worked today.
They are the most LSU team of LSU teams in the sense of, Josh, they've had 4 times where they've gotten turnovers inside their own 20 and haven't scored. They did it twice against USC, and they did it twice against South Carolina. And I swear to God, in the studio, there's a hole in this wall. I mean, and so I'm just being dead honest. And look, what do you do 2 weeks without and getting ready to prepare for Ole Miss when you don't have Perkins? Which I'm not going to be that guy, but Josh, UCLA had 7 yards when he left. I think he's a round peg or a square peg trying to be fit in a round hole, but I think that's interesting. But look, these next 3 games, I thought South Carolina all year, and you can ask Joe, I thought all year when I watched film on them, I was like, y'all better stop sleeping on that line of scrimmage from them because they're going to come up here and pop you in the mouth. Y'all think Shane Beamer's weird. He's going to weird and pop you in the mouth too. So, look, it's very intriguing. But, look, I thank you so much, man, for joining us. This has been fantastic. I know the Pate State store is open, so I want you to tell people about that. But in leaving, I want a shirt that says in Iowa State colors, AP poll sponsored by drug use.
Sponsored by drugs, yeah. Brought to you by drugs.
Brought to you by drugs. But they all know who you are. However, tell everybody what you're doing, where you're going, everything that you're doing.
Well, we're on the road every week because we have convinced the powers that be at CBS that you don't want me in the office. You want me away from here. So they have acquiesced. We're on the road every week. And here's the sad part / really great part. Every time I do this big public reveal that the Pate State store is open, the traffic shuts it down, which is a great problem to have. So the way I have to talk about it is I wait until about 40 minutes into our show. And I just, in between segments, I'll say, hey, PateStateMaterial.com's open again, and then move right along. Because that gets us an acceptable amount of traffic that doesn't shut the site down. So Blake, Joe, PateStateMaterial.com's open. Nice chuggy tees, nice little Freights merch over there. But I don't want to fly a banner behind the plane down at Panama City quite yet because I don't know that we can handle the traffic.
Well, all I know is I'm going to be in there. Thank you so much, Josh. We greatly appreciate you joining us. We'll talk soon, man.
I appreciate you guys having me.
All right, no problem.